So Ohio State currently sitting with the number 2 class in the country right now. I mean, dude, number 1 player in the country, Jeremiah Smith. Do you have a comp that you love for him? It's kind of rare that a player is number 1 in the country at receiver.
It is rare. I don't know if there is a clean comp for him. You know, Andrew talks about Calvin Johnson, which I think it's fascinating. This has kind of been Andrew's kind of pony from the beginning, the guy that he wanted to bet on. He loves Jeremiah Smith. He's been around him for a really long time. He's followed his entire career at Chaminade Madonna and kind of see him really develop. So I don't know if there's a player that jumps out. I mean, I think the biggest thing about Jeremiah Smith, he's clean, checks every box, right? And we talk about checking boxes. Not only is it everything that you're doing off the field in terms of verified measurables, prototype at the position, what he can offer there, but it's hard to find guys, especially at the receiver position, that are able to play as fast as they process the game. That's a receiver almost sometimes it's a proactive position, but in terms of just the field, the intuition, being able to set up leverage at every level of the field with his route running ability, his ability to attack the football, his run after a catch ability is something that we don't talk about enough because he's got such a physical frame at the point of attack. He can just beat you at every level in a lot of different ways. So he is truly special. I think, you know, we went back and forth with Raiola in terms of the number 1 spot, and it became more of, I think, positional value with Raiola. We like Raiola a lot. We obviously love the physical gifts that he possesses, but with Jeremiah Smith, it felt like a guy, okay, if he doesn't end up hitting at the level that we think he would hit at, we still think the floor is probably, like, conservatively a top 12 to 15 talent. I mean, that's what we think of Jeremiah Smith. So you think of all the receivers that they've had at Ohio State: Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr. now. I don't know if there is one that I was more excited about coming out than I am about Jeremiah Smith. And that says a lot. I mean, all those guys are really good players that I feel went to Columbus, played under Brian Hartline, were developed, and then became day 1 NFL draft choices. But Jeremiah Smith, just in terms of the clay, what he offers, I mean, I think he's going to be able to step in day 1. We thought that about Carnell Tate. They're very different players, but just physically, he's a different cat. And then you take all the physical stuff that you love, and then you marry that up with, all right, this is a guy that knows how to play the game at an extremely high level as well. So love the tangibles, love the intangibles. He's just kind of the perfect combination of everything that you're looking for in the evaluation process. And then you want to talk about fit. I mean, there's no better place for him to go. So I'm super excited. I think he's going to be a day 1. Just you're going to know his name in college football. That's going to be a guy that you're going to have to highlight.
He just sometimes you see these prospects in person, and I've seen Jeremiah like 5 or 6 times in person now within like the last year. And you're just your brain just processes like, okay, a guy that big should not move that fast. It just doesn't look right. And those like doesn't look right guys, those are kind of the easy ones. I was like, oh yeah, like Chris Jones. I remember when we got him down there at the Under Armour game in Orlando. I had not seen him in person yet, and we finally I was like, oh my God, like this guy might really be as good as Kimdiche is. You know, just whoa.
It's rare to see what you're talking about, like Hakeem Williams last year. You kind of get around him a little bit and you kind of see him physically and you're like, okay, there's a little bit difference of a presence. But even Hakeem Williams was a guy that you knew was going to be a little bit more of a slower burn, right? Like in terms of that adjustment period, 2 Saturdays, this was going to be a guy that was going to need a little bit of time. That with Jeremiah Smith, I would be, it doesn't exist. I really would be shocked if he is not a day 1 factor in Ohio State. I mean, I do think this is a guy that is just not only, like I said, physically equipped, but I think the way that he plays the game, he has a certain maturity about him, regardless of position, that is really hard to find.
I really do think that if he could play for, like, if Ohio State makes the playoff, I think he would like be used in a playoff game. I mean, like not featured, but like I think he would be on the field. He's I agree. I think he's somebody who needs to come in pretty much immediately and play. I was down there shooting. He was playing 7-on for Express, and there was a corner who's pretty highly rated corner for us. A little bit lower now than he was at the time, but they weren't really throwing Jeremiah the ball. They were trying to spread it around, get other guys some love. And I was trying to shoot one of the TikToks for us. And I went to the OC. He's like, hey, can you guys just force feed Jeremiah? And he's like, well, they're kind of double covering him. He's like, let's just see. Boom, the entire drive, just Jeremiah. And it was a variety of skills, right? It was just that instant, like if you drive a Tesla, it's just like that kind of acceleration. And then he like the ability to stop. Guys that big shouldn't change direction like that. Like that's not normal. And then the one the kid throws a terrible pass and he just like snags it one-handed completely off balance. Like this is stupid. And it's a 4-star corner that he's abusing, right? Like this is like a college kid playing high school ball.
Yeah, and you think about it, like I think a lot of people might think it's circumstantial and say, well, they're not bought in on a guy like Raiola, or they're not bought in on a guy like Julian Saint. No, like we like Raiola a lot. We like Julian Saint a lot. We've had the opportunity to see both those guys that same weekend, right, Bud, out there at Elite 11.
Yeah.
I think this guy's a little bit different in a way that I think a lot of people thought Travis Hunter was different, right, back in 2022. I think there was a little bit of a hesitation there to put Travis Hunter in that spot. And I think there were probably more question marks around Travis Hunter. We didn't have any verified times on Travis Hunter. The only thing that we had was a subjective part of the process where you see him live. And like you said, you just kind of feel him, right? He had dominated every event he had ever been at. You also love the two-way ability. This is more about Jeremiah Smith really taking the decision out of our hands and us feeling very convicted as a group that this is undoubtedly the best player in the country.
No doubt about it. And the maturity, as you mentioned as well. But Ohio State's not just receivers, man. Like they're receiver U right now for sure, but they're also really killing it on the defensive line. Justin Scott, Edric Houston, they got some dudes coming in that like they're going to lose JTT, they're going to lose Sawyer. Let's talk a little bit about these impact defensive linemen Ohio State has coming in.
It's pretty interesting because Larry Johnson was always still to this day, still known for his ability to develop pass rushers. You think about the Bosa brothers, you think about Chase Young, some of the other guys that they've had. And then you kind of look at it recently, he's kind of flipped the script, right? Ohio State is kind of beefed up in terms of their interior body. Justin Scott, to me, we'll talk about the player here in a second, but Justin Scott to me feels like a huge win for Ohio State for a lot of reasons. I felt last year they weren't fully up to speed when it came to NIL. Justin Scott, a lot of opportunities. Notre Dame was in there. They're not known for their NIL aggression, I would say, but Miami was in there, right? And I think was a fixture in that recruitment. Ohio State got this one done. And to me, this is the way of college football. I think he's a beautiful fit in Columbus, but I think out of that footprint, that region, out of the state of Illinois, those are the guys that you need to win. It's almost kind of the same on the West Coast. Like when you have that opportunity, you got to find a way to keep those guys home, right? So I love the Justin Scott addition. He's a young guy. He used to play soccer. He's a two-way player as well. I actually thought that he has more upside on the offensive side of the ball, but it's one of those guys you take, you figure it out. You're not really worried about what side of the ball he's going to play as long as he's suiting up for your team. So he's a little bit different of an athlete. The other guy that has continued to make strides, and I thought was going to be a guy maybe that we moved on from in the top 32. But like I said, another guy played so well, it was kind of hard to boot him out of there. Edric Houston played really good football at Buford. He's grown, quick twitch, explosive, can play him multiple spots on the defensive line. You think about putting those guys together on the interior for Ohio State, kind of makes them different, right? So I like the way Ohio State is kind of building inside out. Then you think about Larry Johnson. I don't think Larry Johnson is ever going to have an issue kind of getting the pick of the litter when it comes to the pass rushers either. So they've done a good job. Been a huge fan of Ohio State. I think Larry Johnson, arguably, if not the best defensive line coach in the country. But they work at it, man. I mean, these aren't recruitments that are layups either, right? But Ohio State, when I was at Michigan, they were the biggest nuisance, especially when it came to defensive linemen. There were a lot of guys that I think we thought we had a good shot at, Tyler Friday being one out of all the names. I bring up Tyler Friday, but Zach Harrison was another one we felt good at Michigan. And Larry Johnson, man, he's just tough to go head-to-head with. Those guys do a good job. And the good thing, you got to give a lot of credit to Ohio State. I think they have adjusted. Like, really good programs do this. They kind of feel out the rest of the marketplace. They kind of see where they fit in, and then they apply what they have learned over the last 1 or 2 years since the NIL era really started. And I think Ohio State is starting to find their place, sitting there at number 2 or number 3 in the country in terms of the 24/7 Sports Composite Team ranking. So applaud Ryan Day, applaud all those guys in that building. I mean, that leadership knows what they're doing from a recruiting standpoint. I think a lot of people they're numb to it. They're numb to that Ohio State success. It's hard to go year in and year out and just live in the top 5. So, a lot of people say it recruits itself. It does not. So, a lot of credit to them, man. They're one of my favorite teams in the country to follow just because of the job that they do on the trail.
Like I think Ohio State recruits itself to like a bare minimum top 15 level, right? Almost any coach in the qualified coach in the country that would actually get hired at Ohio State would keep them in the top 15, maybe top 12. There's no program that recruits itself into the top 5. Like you're exactly right. Like there's sort of a minimum floor just with program resources and whatnot, but nobody's floor is top 5. Like nobody's getting top 5 without really doing a nice job in recruiting and working at it. So I mean, if you give everybody the truth serum, the only teams that probably wouldn't trade their class for this class, Georgia, obviously, who we talked about in that first week episode, and probably Florida because of the upside of Lagway. And other than that, like this is a really, really nice class. Oh, they got a quarterback who's just outside the top 50, and they have another 5-star receiver in Graham too. So probably can't double. I mean, you probably will have to double Smith, but Graham's going to see a little bit of single coverage there in Columbus. That's
he's like the least talked about. He's probably the least talked about receiver, I would say, among the 5 stars. And he's just kind of a guy that I think really fits. You can play him inside out, super smooth, got a dynamic basketball background as well. Him and Mike Matthews are guys that I think, we kind of had our eyes on. When you really come to the first time you have to put the 5-star label on players, there's some guys that you're like, okay, I see it, but they have to grow into it. Mylan Graham has done that. Love Mylan Graham. Inside, outside versatility. I think they can kind of get creative with him a little bit. Jeremiah Smith. That's the other thing is all these guys that they recruit at the receiver position, they're super versatile. They can do a lot of different things, right? So in terms of, how Ohio State wants to craft their passing attack, I mean, it's really up to Ryan Day, Brian Hartline's imagination, because these guys fit in so many different spots, but they also complement each other as well. So Mylan Graham's a dude. You talked about Aaron Nolan a little bit. He's a different type of quarterback than what they have. You think about Ohio State and you think about McCord, and then you think about Devin Brown and Lincoln Kineholz, who, I'm super intrigued with Lincoln Kineholz, what he's going to be like, a very dynamic athlete out of South Dakota. Curious to see his development. And then you got Aaron Nolan, who's just Mr. Steady, a winner, very competitive, excellent intangibles, but he plays within the system. And I think when you're at Ohio State and you have the tools that they have, like I talk about all the time, what is the environment for the quarterback to succeed? Play callers, check. Protection, playmakers, check. You talk about the right environment for a quarterback to succeed. Ohio State is that environment. So Aaron Noland, he might not have the physical upside of some of the other guys in that quarterback room in Columbus, but in terms of fit, I love it. And I think that's going to be a really hard dude to keep off the field.
Travis in the chat says, is Jeremiah similar to A.J. Brown?
Yeah, A.J. Brown is in some ways, yes. A.J. Brown is, you got to be careful with those when you're pro receivers. And I'm not talking about, I just came on here and talked about Jeremiah Smith being different and being a unicorn, and he certainly is. Yeah, it's been hard to find one guy that you're just like, yeah, that's kind of it, because he possesses all those. I think A.J. Brown's, 6'1", hovering around there, 225 pounds, plays a lot bigger than he actually is. Excellent run after catch. He can do a little bit of everything as well. That's probably a safe one. I always try to be a little bit conservative with those player comps, but yeah, Jeremiah Smith, just use your imagination, right? A little bit of everything. Whoever your favorite receiver is, he's got all of that DNA.
I do think some of the things, style, not talent and success, because you're crazy to comp these guys. Like, this is definitely this type of dude. AJ, I think like AJ's a little more like violent and physical, I think, but he also tracked the ball extremely well. Like AJ Brown was a pretty good baseball player, and also shout out if he's almost certainly he's not watching, but if he is watching, AJ Brown's dad is freaking hilarious. Like we always hop the bus to the opening together, and like that guy had me rolling every single day to the opening. So shout out Mr. Brown. In terms of like the feel for breaking down and getting across field, some of the in-breaking routes, I do think there's some Julio style. I don't want to say he's going to be Julio. Julio's a Hall of Famer, but I think there's some Julio style in Jeremiah's game there. Like big guys who are that tall don't get out of their breaks that well and then redirect, and he does that pretty well.
I don't shy away from that one. Like last year we talked about Hakeem Williams. You talk about like that's the guy that I kind of comped to Julio. That one was kind of far out. Like, hey, this guy's a specimen. I think if he ever gets there, I think that Julio Jones and you talk about AJ Brown a little bit as well, but I think Julio is probably a closer comp to a guy like Jeremiah Smith. Julio is one of those guys that still had to develop when he got to Alabama. He was just so much of a freak. You couldn't keep him off the field early as well. So they were smart about finding ways to get him touches. That's kind of the same thing I see with Ohio State. It's like, okay, whatever limitation you think that he might have, whether it's, hey, he needs more time to feel comfortable within the system, you got to find a way to get that guy maybe 3 or 4 touches, kind of manufacture different ways to get him the football. I talked about the run after catch. I think that's one thing that we often overlook because he's such a physical specimen with the capability to dominate on the perimeter. But I also think he's very special at the point of attack and his ability to kind of make plays as a runner as well. So, like I said, multidimensional, can beat you every different way. I think the other thing that kind of differentiates him from the other guys in the class is he's a 3-level guy, right? Everything that you're looking for in the route tree. I think you think about Ohio State system, what they do, a lot of shallow unders, deep overs, right? That's a guy that I think they're going to be able to kind of scheme up, get open. So yeah, everything about him is honestly, it's kind of perfect.
No doubt about it. Was it that, were you at Bama in 2010 when it was the Bama LSU game in Tuscaloosa? They throw in the little bubble screen, and LSU was defending them really well all day, and then Julio jukes 2 guys and goes 70, and it was sort of called game there.
Was that
or was it 09?
Yes. Yeah, I think it was 09 because I'm thinking Patrick Peterson. I don't know. I might be wrong, but I remember those two squaring up with each other once or twice, and I think Pat Pete was probably a junior at that point. And I think Julio was a freshman, but late in the game, yes. I think it was like a jailbreak screen, not even a bubble or anything like that. Just housed it. Yeah, he's a stud.
That was different.